It's been a long day of storytelling, of weaving together agricultural images to help the gathered crowd understand something about faith, something about the kingdom. Jesus has even taken time in between telling these parables to interpret them for his disciples. The crowd is so big gathered on the shore that he has been preaching all day, sitting in a boat so he can face them all. He's tired, and he needs some space away from the crowd to recharge with his close people. Seeing as he's already in a boat, Jesus and his disciples set off for the other side of the lake, though they can't shake a few extra boats that follow them, hoping for more from this teacher they've heard so much about. Exhausted, Jesus curls up on a cushion in the back of the boat and soon succumbs to sleep, lulled by the gentle rocking of waves. As he rests, the wind arrives and stirs up a storm. Depending on the translation, it's a furious squall or a fierce gale of wind. The waves become choppy and dangerous, and water quickly spills over the edge of the boat, swamping it. Understandably, the disciples, many experienced fishermen, begin to panic. They wake Jesus, deeply afraid for their lives, and they challenge him for sleeping during a crisis, wondering if he cares that they're in danger. Jesus does care. He gets up and commands the wind and the sea to still. They do, and so too do the terrified disciples. One might wonder which came first, the storm or their anxiety. Jesus knows that getting frustrated at their humanness, their penchant for fear in the face of a life-threatening situation, wouldn't be constructive. He's familiar with the feeling himself, but still he challenges them with his favourite rhetorical tool, the question. Why have they let their fear obscure their faith? Didn't they know that God was in the storm with them? Clearly not. The disciples turned to each other, struck by a mixture of awe and fear. They struggled to comprehend their teacher, who can one moment sleep through a storm and the next command the wind and waves. Even after leaving their homes to follow him, watching him heal and preach, they are surprised by this miracle, this power. I wonder how it feels to live through a parable, to stare perplexed at the face of God and wonder who he is. So there's a lot going on here in the space of just 7 verses, and it raises a whole bunch of questions. Firstly, how do I learn to sleep so deeply that I don't notice a life-threatening storm? Why do we so often assume that prioritizing our own rest is indicative of a lack of care for what's going on in the rest of the world, as if we carry all its burdens on our shoulders and can't ever lay them down? Are fear and faith at odds? How do we honour our mental health alongside our faith? As someone who lives with anxiety, am I bad at following the Bible's most often repeated command to not be afraid? And how do we have faith when God and Jesus are not wholly knowable? Spoiler alert, I don't have any tidy answers for you. You will be left with loose threads to tug for yourselves, because I'm not an expert and sermons are supposed to engage our brains. Let's start with some definitions because I'm a word nerd. Fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Pretty understandable when your boat is about to go under. To take it a step further, anxiety is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease about something with an uncertain outcome. When you live with anxiety, it can be tricky to tell between the two, when an uncertain outcome can feel a lot like the threat of danger. Faith is harder to define. The Oxford Dictionary reckons faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something, Or faith is a strong belief in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual conviction rather than proof. In my experience, though, faith walks hand in hand with doubt. Conviction is different to certainty. We choose to believe that there is a loving God, often based on our experiences, but there is always an element of mystery, because God is so much bigger than our ability to comprehend them. Returning to the passage, this story provides us with rich imagery for understanding the relationship between faith and fear. N.T. Wright says that Mark's readers would have heard older echoes in this story. Of Jonah being caught in a storm as he attempted to flee God's call to be a prophet. Of the Israelites escaping Egypt through a divinely parted Red Sea. Of creation emerging from the dark primal sea at the beginning of Genesis. The sea, in the cultural context of the people in this story, symbolized the dark power of evil that threatens to destroy God's creation. So Jesus and his disciples take to the water, this liminal chaos where humans become fragile. It's gentle at first, even as they leave the Galilean shoreline and head toward Gerasene, a Gentile town where Jesus will soon heal a person possessed by a legion of demons. I'll let someone else unpack that one. When the storm disrupts them and the disciples wake Jesus, this is the first time he has been addressed as teacher in Mark's Gospel. Brian K. Blount posits, how does Jesus teach faith? By falling asleep on a sinking boat. It not only informs, it instigates. It's a concrete demonstration of what the parables Jesus taught earlier that day were trying to illustrate, that God's kingdom is at hand. After Jesus stills the storm and the water is calm, the disciples are still afraid. The life-threatening situation has ended. They are no longer in danger. Instead, they turn their fear towards the one who brought the calm. They have watched him heal the sick. They have heard him tell parables and interpret them. And yet, in the revelation of this power, they are scared of his divinity. He figuratively steps into the light and is no longer the person they thought he was. Jesus asked them, "Why are you afraid?" in present tense. Not why were you afraid while your lives were threatened, but why are you now afraid of who I have revealed myself to be? Why are you afraid of what the calm means? Safe from the storm, they must wrestle instead with the mystery we name God, embodied in the person of Jesus. God is bigger than we can ever imagine or understand, and Jesus is God, both human and divine. That's a lot to wrap your head around, especially as you follow and listen to and ask questions of and break bread with the Son of God in the flesh. Humans are notorious for trying to put things in boxes. Ourselves, each other, an easily digestible worldview, even who God is. But the God who is revealed in Jesus will always target the edges of that box and ask us to expand. N.T. Wright suggests there's a parallel to be drawn between the calm after the storm and the empty tomb. Both pose the question, who then is this Jesus? Sorry, my voice is going. I'm sure many of us have had storm experiences in our lives. Perhaps you have survived a literal storm or a natural disaster. Perhaps something has happened in your life that plunged you into chaos, or your worldview has been challenged in a way that is life-altering. Perhaps overwhelm is an all too familiar feeling when stresses pile on top of each other to the point of crisis. Perhaps grief for you is like a storm. Sometimes following a God who is too big for our human brains to fully comprehend can feel scary. There isn't the comforting certainty of putting God in a box. We can sometimes mistake new information outside the bounds of our beliefs for a threat. Often, the calm feels like the storm. What if we could make peace with that mystery, with the unknowing? Easier said than done, I know. As a person who lives with anxiety, I constantly have to remind myself that it's okay not to know all the answers, and learn this lesson over and over again, and still sometimes my brain won't listen. If I've learned anything in therapy, it's the importance of presence, of returning to my body gently, of being reminded I'm not alone, and that the storm will end. What if, in the midst of the storm, or the calm that feels like a storm, we can learn to make peace with the mystery and reach for God's grounding presence? What if, in the midst of the storm, or the calm that feels like a storm, we can learn to make peace with the mystery and reach for God's grounding presence? Because that's what the disciples do in this story. The wind stirs up a storm, and in their fear, the disciples wake Jesus. They reach out to the presence of God with them in the storm. Because God is always with us in the storm, and in the calm that feels like a storm, and when we feel like we are the storm. The hard part is being present to the presence of God, the mystery in our midst, and listening when Jesus says, "Peace, be still." Amen.